So what is fandom really about? Taylor Swift is arriving in Australia later this week, and it's very difficult to avoid reflecting upon the impact she's having on the world and on people at the moment. I'm not going to discuss the merits of her music and artistry here. Rather, I'm going to discuss this whole concept of fandom, of being a star, becoming an idol, not just of millions, but in this case, possibly billions. I want to discuss this hero worship, this cult-like phenomenon. Of course, this is not a new phenomenon. In the 50s, girls were swooning over Frank Sinatra. And there was, of course, Beatlemania. Most of us have probably seen footage of crowds of young girls screaming, fainting, in tears at the early Beatles concerts. There's a level of hysteria here, to be sure. I hesitate a little over using the word hysteria here because it is, after all, a very gender-loaded term. It derives from the Greek word for the uterus, and the implication is that the female gender is susceptible to this hysteria, and men, presumably, are not. As a man, I claim the right to be just as hysterical as any woman if I want to be. I suspect it's largely societal norms and expectations that prevent most of us, men that is, from being so hysterical rather than the possession of an actual womb. I was watching a YouTube video the other day, and yes, you've got me. I watch a lot of YouTube videos, particularly related to music. This guitarist guy was observing the difference between the audience at, say, a Taylor Swift concert and the, generally, men at a concert by some cool, real musicians, indie musicians. I can't think of any offhand who might fit the bill. But the men were there with serious looks on their faces, barely moving. The crowd at the Swift concert, girls, women, and men and boys, were dancing, singing along, having a great time. Of course, there are plenty in our society who would sneer at any man who attended a Taylor Swift concert, let alone actually enjoyed it. No, the cool dude would be like, yeah, well, my girlfriend, wife, daughter, somebody wanted to go, hoping all along that the cameras didn't catch him actually enjoying himself. But I digress. There is, I think, though, a fundamental difference between the reaction of fans at a Taylor Swift concert and those at, say, an early Beatles concert. At a Swift concert, people are actually listening to the music and enjoying it, singing along to it. They're not screaming. There is, of course, the initial scream when she first appears on stage, but once the music starts, they're listening, they're engaged. The noise comes from their singing along, not from their screaming. But at an early Beatles concert, the fans are screaming during the music. They're not listening to it. No one can hear it, including the Beatles themselves on the stage, which is, of course, a large part of why they quit touring. They wanted people to actually hear their music. What a weird concept. It's pretty clear that the early fandom of the Beatles had little interest in the music itself. It was about the Beatles as handsome, young, ever so slightly, rebellious young men. It was a cult of personality, except, of course, that none of them knew anything at all about the actual personalities of John, Paul, George and Ringo. It was a cult of image and imagined personality. These girls, and let's be honest, they were mostly girls at this stage, they just wanted to date these guys. It really was that simple. Taylor Swift's fans love the music, which is not to say, of course, that this is not also a cult of personality. And I use the word cult quite purposefully. This is also very much about Taylor Swift is as a person. She's made her life very public. From the time she was a tiny baby, her life has been filmed. Initially, of course, by her parents. And plenty of that early footage can be seen online. She has lived her life in public on social media via Instagram, TikTok. Her fans know when her birthday is, who her friends are, what her cats' names are, who was at what party and who wasn't, who she's dating. And this is totally down to Taylor herself, who constantly shares herself, including some very candid moments with her fans. And of course, this kind of exposure can lead to some very difficult moments in life. Stalkers, making enemies, the media turning against her, tales of manipulation of and by her. And of course, she shared her life in her music. Her life and music are completely intertwined in a way that's probably never been so true of any other artist. It's not surprising then that while Swifties love her music, and it's probably this that initially brought them along, they don't stop there. They become devotees of her life too. And this, of course, is where things start to become cultish. In the fans' eyes, she can do nothing wrong. They feel that they know her intimately and that she knows them. And that's true to a surprising extent. They know her, obviously, through her songs and social media, but she knows them too. She follows her followers. She knows about their lives. Some of them, of course, not all of them. She interacts with them. And there's always a possibility that she will notice me, interact with me. She does this so often that it becomes a real possibility. Is this all just a publicity stunt for Taylor? Is it a game? Is it all just about record sales? It doesn't seem to be, but maybe she's just really, really good at this. Of course, this devotion to her person means that her fans will defend her fiercely when they see or hear any kind of criticism. Any kind of criticism, not just of her art and music. Just watch any video where a YouTuber is daring to say something critical about one of her songs or one of her videos. They almost preface it with a lengthy apology. They don't want to alienate Taylor's fan base, not just because they fear an attack from the Swifties, but also because if they've mentioned Taylor at all, a large part of their audience will suddenly be Swifties. And this will greatly boost their audience and subscriber numbers. Probably adding the name Taylor Swift somewhere to this video will boost its audience. So why does this phenomenon happen? Well, let's call it worship, that goes far beyond appreciation of the person's art or music. I think Taylor is a special case. I really don't think there's been a phenomenon like her before. But her case serves to highlight the issues that arise whenever anyone attracts fans, which is after all short for fanatics, rather than just admirers. How does admiration, appreciation of a person's art become attached to the person themselves? How do we become so emotionally invested in the person rather than just the art, to the extent that we become outraged if that person is attacked or criticised, or absolutely devastated if that person fails us, which they will, of course. We also begin to live our lives vicariously through their experience, or at least the experiences that they share with us. At the very least, we feel part of something bigger than ourselves. This cult of personality is not a new thing, of course, though I think we're more used to hearing it in the context of politics than entertainment. There's no doubt been a great deal written about it, which I probably should read. I think it's a bit different, though, when we're talking about an artist as opposed to a political leader. I think with an artist it's even more personal because their art is personal. How can it not be? They really have shared something of themselves with us in a way that politicians surely have never done. So we feel that we know this person, and that, to some extent at least, they know and understand us. They're like friends. And, as with friends, our tendency is to defend them, to stand by them if they're true friends, or to feel personally betrayed if they seriously let us down. So, is this a misplaced feeling, an inappropriate feeling? I wonder, is it akin to the transference that some schools of psychology talk about? Do we fall in love with our therapist? Because that's also what these artists can become for us, de facto therapists. I felt this within myself, this urge to like everything about this person, to desperately want them to be, yes, perfect. Don't we initially do this in love too, for better or for worse? And isn't this why it's so easy to feel betrayed and for love to flip over so easily into hate? I have to watch carefully this tendency within myself. I need to make sure that I retain a critical eye on the person's work. Just because I like this song or that album doesn't mean I have to like the next one. I don't have to find some way to force myself to like it. Why would I even feel the urge to do this? But I do. Because not liking it feels like some kind of betrayal of my friend, as does liking something done by someone else, because this relationship slips dangerously towards an illusory friendship. I think that if you really like someone's work, this can be a real struggle, this entanglement of the person with their art. In Taylor's case, she's clearly fostered this. Her life is her art, and vice versa. I don't think she's done this with any malicious intentions. It's just who she is. Cultish behaviour and fanaticism can be terrifying, regardless of the sphere of life in which it manifests itself. The tendency towards it can be very powerful. Let's try to be aware of that tendency and those forces within ourselves. Let's try to retain a certain critical distance. Clearly, that's a more healthy position to adopt if we can manage it. And then, if the breakup does come, we won't be quite so devastated.